The morning of July 22nd, 2025, started like so many others at the Osbourne family estate in Buckinghamshire, but Sharon Osbourne would later realise that every detail of that day had been touched by an almost ethereal quality, as if the universe itself was preparing to say goodbye to one of rock's most enduring legends. She had been by her husband's side for 43 years, through the wildest highs and the most devastating lows, through addiction and recovery, scandal and triumph, but nothing could have prepared her for the profound tenderness and unexpected peace of those final hours with the man the world knew as the Prince of Darkness. In the weeks following Ozzy's death from a heart attack at age 76, Sharon has slowly begun to share the intimate details of their last moments together, not the public spectacle that had defined so much of their extraordinary lives, but the quiet, sacred space where John Michael Osbourne, the boy from Birmingham who had conquered the world with his voice and spirit, said his final goodbye to the woman who had been his anchor, his manager, his salvation, and his greatest love. He was at peace, Sharon revealed in her first extensive interview since the funeral, her voice carrying the weight of profound grief, but also the warmth of treasured memories that no amount of time could diminish. After all those years of chaos, of addiction, of fighting his demons, both literal and metaphorical, he was finally, truly at peace. And I think, deep in his heart, he knew it was time to go home. If this intimate story of love and final farewells moves you, please consider leaving a like to honor Sharon's courage in sharing these precious moments with the world. The story of those final moments actually begins 17 days earlier at Villa Park in Birmingham, during what would become Ozzy's triumphant and heartbreaking final performance. The Back to the Beginning concert had been Sharon's idea from the start, a way for her husband to say goodbye to his fans properly, with dignity and celebration, in the city where it all started, surrounded by the music that had defined generations and changed the course of rock history forever. "I never wanted Ozzy to just disappear without some big event," Sharon explained, her eyes growing distant with memory, as she recalled the months of planning that had gone into what everyone hoped would be a celebration rather than a funeral. "It's the best way then to go home to where it all started, to go to his favourite stadium in the world, which is home to his beloved Aston Villa team, and it was just perfect. Everything about that night was exactly what Ozzy would have wanted." The concert itself had been magical. 42,000 fans singing along to every word, guest performances from Metallica, Pantera, and Alice in Chains, a live stream that reached millions more around the globe. But what happened after that show, in the quiet moments when the crowds had gone home and the equipment was being packed away, would stay with Sharon forever and provide her with a source of comfort in the dark days that followed. "He turned around and he said to me that night," he said, "I had no idea that so many people liked me," Sharon recalled, her voice breaking slightly as she remembered the wonder in her husband's eyes. Ozzy's always been in his own bubble. Despite all the success, all the platinum records, all the sold-out arenas spanning 5 decades, he genuinely had no idea how much he meant to people. He saw himself as this weird kid from Birmingham who got lucky, not as the icon millions of people saw him as. Those words would prove to be prophetic, a kind of benediction that seemed to grant Ozzy the peace he had been searching for his entire life. In the days that followed the Birmingham concert, Sharon noticed a change in her husband, not a physical improvement, as his Parkinson's disease and heart condition continued to progress, but something deeper, something spiritual. He kept talking about that night, Sharon remembered, her hands folding and unfolding in her lap as she spoke, how the fans had sung along to every single word, how they'd chanted his name with such love and devotion, how they'd shown him this overwhelming affection that he'd never truly understood before. For someone who had spent so many years being vilified by the media, being blamed for society's problems, being called a bad influence, and worse, it was like a revelation, like he'd finally been given permission to see himself the way his fans had always seen him. The transformation was subtle, but profound. Ozzy began spending more time with his family, having longer conversations with his children about life, love, and legacy. He worked on final recordings that Sharon describes as the most honest music he'd ever made, stripping away all the theatrical elements to reveal the beating heart of the man behind the myth. He was tying up loose ends, Sharon realized in retrospect. Not in a morbid way, but with this beautiful sense of completion. He called old friends he hadn't spoken to in years, wrote letters to people who had meant something to him, spent hours looking through photo albums and telling me stories I'd never heard before. The morning of July 22nd began before dawn, which was unusual for Ozzy, who had always been a night owl. But Sharon said he seemed different that day, not weaker, despite his physical struggles, but somehow luminous, as if lit from within by some inner fire. He woke up around 5 in the morning, which was so unusual for him, she shared, her voice growing softer as she recounted those precious final hours. But he wasn't restless or uncomfortable, like he sometimes was when the Parkinson's made it hard to sleep. He was calm, more calm than I'd seen him in years. He reached for my hand and said, "Sharon, love, can we just talk? I want to tell you some things." What followed was a conversation that Sharon describes as the most important of their 43-year marriage, a kind of summation of their extraordinary life together. They talked about their children, Amy, Kelly, and Jack, and how proud Ozzy was of the adults they had become despite growing up in such an unconventional household, constantly in the public eye, dealing with their father's struggles with addiction and the family's very public battles. He was so proud of them, Sharon said, tears beginning to flow. He worried for years that he'd damaged them, that growing up with him as a father had been too much for them to handle. But that morning, he told me he could see that they'd grown into strong, compassionate, creative people, and he felt like maybe he'd done something right after all. They reminisced about the early days of their relationship, when Sharon was just Don Arden's daughter, tasked with managing this wild man from Birmingham who had just been kicked out of Black Sabbath, and how their professional relationship had blossomed into a love story that had survived addiction, scandal, health crises, infidelity, and the relentless pressure of life in the public eye. He told me about the first time he saw me, Sharon shared, smiling through her tears. I was just a kid, really, working for my father, and he was this broken man who just lost everything he thought defined him. But he said he knew from that first meeting that I was going to save his life, and in a way, I did, but he saved mine too. They talked about the music, of course, the songs that had become anthems for generations of misfits and rebels, the albums that had changed the landscape of rock forever, the performances that had become legendary. But more than that, they talked about what the music had meant to him personally, how it had been his way of processing trauma, of making sense of a world that often seemed hostile and incomprehensible. He said the music was never really about rebellion for the sake of rebellion, Sharon explained. It was about giving voice to people who felt voiceless, about creating a community for the outcasts and the weird kids and the ones who didn't fit in anywhere else. He was so proud that his music had helped people through difficult times, that it had been a source of strength and comfort for so many. As the morning progressed, other family members began arriving at the estate. The children had been visiting more frequently in recent weeks, sensing that their father's time was growing short. Ozzy's sister Jean had been there the night before, and Sharon's brother David arrived with his family. But there was no sense of panic or morbid vigil. Instead, Sharon describes an atmosphere of love, acceptance, and even joy. We all knew, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Not that he was going to die that day specifically, but that he was ready. He'd made his peace with everything, his past mistakes, his regrets, his legacy. He'd said goodbye to his fans at Birmingham, and now he was saying goodbye to us. But it wasn't sad, not really. It was beautiful. Around mid-morning, Ozzy asked to be moved to his favorite chair by the window overlooking the lake on their property. The room filled with family, Sharon at his side, the children gathered around, grandchildren playing quietly nearby. They shared stories, laughed at memories of his most outrageous antics, and listened as Ozzy offered gentle advice and words of love to each person in the room. He had something specific to say to each of us, Sharon recalled. To Amy, he talked about her strength and independence, how proud he was that she'd carved out her own path. To Kelly, he spoke about her creativity and her big heart, how she'd inherited the best parts of both of us. To Jack, he talked about responsibility and family, how Jack had become the man Ozzy had always hoped to be. The heart attack came suddenly, but not unexpectedly, around noon. Sharon was holding Ozzy's hand, as she had been for most of the morning, when she felt his grip tighten slightly. His eyes, which had been growing dimmer with the progression of his illness, suddenly seemed to clear and focus with startling intensity. There was no pain, Sharon emphasized, wanting to dispel any rumors or misconceptions about her husband's final moments. No struggle, no fear, no desperate gasping for breath like you see in movies. He squeezed my hand, looked at me with those eyes that had seen so much, experienced so much, survived so much, and he smiled. He actually smiled, this beautiful, peaceful smile. And then he just let go. It was like watching someone fall into the most restful sleep imaginable. The family had prepared for this moment, at least intellectually, but the reality was both harder and easier than Sharon had expected. The immediate aftermath was a blur of phone calls, arrangements, and the surreal experience of watching the world react to news that felt simultaneously shocking and inevitable. The paramedics from Thames Valley Air Ambulance arrived quickly, the helicopter landing in the field near their home within 15 minutes of Sharon's call. The emergency team worked valiantly for 2 hours, trying everything in their considerable arsenal to restart Ozzy's heart. But Sharon knew their efforts were in vain. Ozzy had already gone, peacefully and surrounded by the love he had finally learned to accept and understand. The hardest part wasn't watching him go, Sharon reflected, her voice growing stronger as she spoke about her husband's dignity in death. He was ready, and in a strange way, I was ready too. We'd had 43 incredible years together, longer than most people get to love someone that deeply. The hardest part was realizing that the world had lost something irreplaceable. Not just a rock star or a celebrity, but a man who had shown millions of people that it was okay to be different, okay to struggle, okay to be imperfect and still worthy of love. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity, official statements to the press, funeral arrangements, and an overwhelming outpouring of grief and love from around the world. Tributes poured in from everyone from Sir Elton John to the president, from fellow rock legends to teenagers who had just discovered Ozzy's music on streaming platforms. But through it all, Sharon found herself returning to those final conversations, finding comfort in Ozzy's words and in the knowledge that their love story had reached its natural, if heartbreaking, conclusion. The messages from fans were incredible, Sharon said, her voice filled with gratitude. People sharing stories about how Ozzy's music had helped them through depression, through loss, through feeling like they didn't belong anywhere. Reading those messages, I understood even more deeply what he meant when he said he had no idea how much people liked him. He wasn't just liked, he was beloved, cherished, needed. The decision to hold a public funeral procession through Birmingham had been difficult, but Sharon felt it was what Ozzy would have wanted. The response exceeded even her wildest expectations. Thousands of people lined the streets, many having traveled from across the globe just to say goodbye. The sight of so many people celebrating her husband's life, singing his songs, sharing their memories, provided Sharon with a kind of healing she hadn't expected. The funeral procession through Birmingham on July 30th became a celebration of that love Sharon had witnessed in Ozzy's final days. As Sharon stood at the Black Sabbath Bridge, overwhelmed by the flowers, messages, and tributes left by fans from every walk of life, she was reminded of Ozzy's wonder at discovering how much people cared about him. The bridge itself had become a shrine, covered in flowers, photographs, vinyl records, guitar picks, and handwritten letters from fans sharing how Ozzy's music had changed their lives. "Ozzy, Ozzy, Ozzy, oi, oi, oi!" the crowd chanted as the hearse arrived, and Sharon found herself smiling through her tears, feeling her husband's presence in the voices of the thousands who had come to honor him. She flashed Ozzy's signature peace sign to the crowd, a gesture that felt like one final gift from her husband to the fans who had meant so much to him and who had finally helped him understand his own worth. "The metal fans are the most loyal fans in the world," Sharon observed, echoing words she had spoken in interviews before Ozzy's death. "When they're a fan, you've got them for life. They don't go anywhere." And seeing all those people lined up along the streets, singing his songs, celebrating his life, wearing his t-shirts from tours spanning 5 decades, I knew that Ozzy's wonder at being loved was completely justified. He really had no idea how much he meant to people. The private funeral that followed was exactly what Ozzy would have wanted, a celebration of life rather than a mourning of death, or as he had once joked, not a mope fest. Friends and family shared stories, laughed at memories of his most outrageous antics, and honored both the public figure and the private man they had known and loved. Music filled the service, not just Ozzy's songs, but also tracks by the Beatles, who had inspired him to become a musician in the first place. He used to say he wanted his funeral to be a celebration, Sharon remembered, smiling at the memory of one of their many conversations about mortality. He even joked about having Justin Bieber and Susan Boyle on the playlist if it made people happy, and about having someone knock on the inside of the coffin as a final prank. That was Ozzy, always thinking about making other people smile, even at his own funeral. He wanted people to remember the joy, not just the sadness. Among the attendees were his Black Sabbath bandmates, Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward, who served as pallbearers and delivered emotional tributes to their friend and collaborator. Their presence provided a sense of completeness, bringing the story of Black Sabbath full circle from 4 working-class kids from Birmingham to the global legends they had become. Seeing Tony, Geezer, and Bill carrying Ozzy's coffin was one of the most moving things I've ever witnessed, Sharon shared. These 4 men had shared something so special, had created music that changed the world. They'd been through everything together: success, failure, addiction, recovery, arguments, reconciliation. In that moment, they were just 4 old friends saying goodbye to one of their own. The burial took place at the family estate, beside the lake that Ozzy had loved so much during his final years. Sharon had chosen a simple headstone with words that captured the essence of the man she had loved. John Michael Ozzy Osbourne, husband, father, friend. The music never dies. In the weeks since the funeral, Sharon has found herself navigating a strange new reality. Life without the partner who had been at the center of her world for more than 4 decades. But she's also discovered that sharing these intimate details of their final time together has brought her a measure of peace and has helped her process her grief. People have asked me why I chose to share such private moments, Sharon explained. These are sacred memories after all. But I realized that Ozzy belonged to his fans almost as much as he belonged to me. They loved him too, and they deserve to know that his final days were filled with love and peace, not pain and fear. Sharon's decision to reveal these intimate details hasn't been easy, but she feels it's important for people to understand who Ozzy really was beneath the public persona. The theatrical shock rocker who bit the head off a bat, the reality TV star who fumbled with remote controls, the rock legend who influenced generations of musicians. The world knew him as the Prince of Darkness, the wild man of rock, the guy who bit the head off a bat and snorted a line of ants, she said, her voice filled with both pride and tenderness. But I knew him as a man who cried at Disney movies, who called the children every day when they were away from home, who worried constantly about being a good father and husband despite all the chaos of our lives. I knew him as the love of my life, as my best friend, as the person who made every day an adventure. The legacy Ozzy left behind extends far beyond his music, though Sharon acknowledges that the songs will be his most lasting contribution to the world. The final recordings he made, set to be released as Forever, the Final Chapter, include what Sharon calls his most personal work ever. Songs that strip away all the theatrical elements and reveal the beating heart of the man behind the myth. He wanted people to know that the music came from a real place, Sharon explained, her voice growing passionate as she spoke about her husband's artistic integrity. Not from some calculated desire to shock or rebel or sell records, but from a genuine need to express the things that were too big, too complex, too painful, or too beautiful to say any other way. Every song was a piece of his soul. The influence of that music continues to ripple outward, inspiring new generations of artists who see in Ozzy's example the permission to be authentically themselves. Sharon receives letters daily from musicians who credit Ozzy with showing them that success didn't require conformity, that being different could be a strength rather than a weakness. Just last week, I got a letter from a young woman who said that Crazy Train had literally saved her life during a period of severe depression, Sharon shared. She said that hearing Ozzy sing about mental illness with such raw honesty had made her feel less alone, had given her the courage to seek help. That's the real legacy, not the album sales or the awards, but the lives that were touched and changed. As Sharon continues to navigate life without her partner of more than 4 decades, She finds strength in unexpected places. The routine tasks of managing Ozzy's estate and legacy have provided structure to her days, while the outpouring of love from fans around the world has reminded her that she's not alone in her grief. "I'm still his manager in a way," she said with a slight smile. "Still taking care of business. Still making sure his music reaches the people who need to hear it. It's what I've been doing for 40 years, and in some strange way, it keeps him close to me." The Osbourne family home in Buckinghamshire has become a place of pilgrimage for fans, who leave flowers, letters, and mementos at the gates. Sharon has decided to preserve Ozzy's studio exactly as he left it, with his final lyrics still scrawled on a notepad beside the mixing board. "Sometimes I go in there and I can still feel him," she admitted. "Not in a supernatural way, but in the way that someone's presence can linger in a space where they spent so much time creating, dreaming, working. It's comforting." The final moments they shared will remain sacred to Sharon, a private treasure in a life that was largely lived in public. But in sharing even these glimpses, she hopes to honor the man who taught the world that authenticity, messy, complicated, beautiful authenticity, was worth more than any amount of fame or fortune. "He died knowing he was loved," Sharon concluded, her voice strong despite the tears that still come easily when she speaks about her husband. "After all those years of uncertainty, all those years of feeling like an outsider, all those years of wondering if he was really worthy of the adoration he received, he finally understood that he had touched millions of lives in ways he never could have imagined. That knowledge gave him peace, and it gives me peace too." She paused, looking out the window toward the lake where Ozzy now rests, where the man who had spent his life creating music for the misfits and outcasts had found his final peace. "People ask me what I want his legacy to be," Sharon continued, "and I think it's simple. I want people to remember that Ozzy showed us it was okay to be different, okay to struggle with your demons, okay to make mistakes as long as you kept trying to do better and to love deeper. I want them to remember that he took all his pain and darkness and transformed it into something beautiful that brought light to other people's lives. In the end, the Prince of Darkness had found his light, in the love of his family, in the devotion of his fans, in the knowledge that his music would live on forever, continuing to comfort the misfits, inspire the rebels, and remind everyone that being different isn't just okay. It's magnificent, it's necessary, it's the most beautiful thing in the world." If this intimate portrait of Sharon and Ozzy's final moments together touched your heart, please consider sharing your appreciation with a like. Their love story, spanning 43 years of triumph and challenge, continues to inspire those who believe in the power of unconditional love and the redemptive power of music.